Hi, welcome into the second floor of the Duncan Student Center. I'm Ellen Geyer, and Shamrock Sports starts right now.
I'm Ellen Geyer, and you're watching Shamrock Sports. And my childhood dreams coming true.
You know, Notre Dame, they won it in the year that doesn't count. This doesn't matter at all. Join a conference.
Williams' helmet off. He's out. Jafar Armstrong in. Fake to him. Setting up the screen to Armstrong. Here goes the senior from Missouri. Looking to run inside the 10. Inside the 5. To the right. Ray lined up in the backfield. Same motion, same setup. This time it's the boot. Bryce in trouble, and he is brought down by Foskey. Now they will go. Yep, bouncing outside. It is Kieran Williams. He will go the distance. Notre Dame touchdown, Kieran Williams.
Hi guys, welcome back in. I'm Ellen Geyer. Today I'm joined by Pineda and Paul Farrington. And we have a lot to catch up on. It's been a while since we've had a Shamrock Sports, a long winter break, and more sports in action right now than we've ever had in Notre Dame sports, just because of all the delays in the fall with COVID and all of that going on. So this is going to be quite the mouthful, but we're going to run through the list very quickly of what teams are participating, or what teams are competing right now, and what's going on with them. So we have fencing, who was undefeated at the Ohio State Invitational last weekend. Men's golf was 8th out of 11th at the Timuquana Collegiate Challenge. They've got another invitational coming up this weekend. Same thing with women's golf. They've got another invitational in 2 weeks, but they were 12th out of 15 at the Purdue Intercollegiate Challenge, which was last weekend. Men's and women's lacrosse are both getting into their first couple of games. The men will open their season next weekend against Robert Morris at home, and the women just had their season opener in Loftus a couple nights ago, where they beat Vanderbilt by about 10 goals. Men's and women's soccer will be back again because the NCAA sanctioned tournament got pushed to the spring because there were so many issues in the fall. And then we've got softball, swimming and diving, men's tennis, women's tennis, track and field. Everybody is kind of most of the way through their seasons, especially track and field and swimming and diving, which are going to be looking ahead to the ACC and NCAA championships in the next couple of weeks. So, with all of that being said, you guys, what sport are you most excited to see this spring?
That wasn't a mouthful. You weren't kidding. Well, I'm excited about women's basketball. I always just love to watch this women's basketball team, and in the first year of the Ivy era, they're even more fun to watch because there's so much potential coming. And compared to last year, where you kind of saw the way this team was trending, there were a few worries, can they follow up on some of these amazing seasons they put together? And I think this season, watching them has really shown me that they have so many good pieces here now coming in for the future, great recruits coming in. So I'm really excited to see the direction that they go, and I'm excited to see how strong they can finish off the season in their last 4 games, the regular season.
I have to go with something you didn't mention, the blue and gold game, of course. No, I won't get back into
Paul
football.
just really wants to talk about football.
I would love to get back to
him.
football. But no, I'm excited to see this men's basketball team down the stretch. I know we have a lot coming up on them, but they're playing well right now, and I'm excited to see how they finish the season.
Yeah, this is a men's basketball team that's won 6 out of their last 8 games, so it's going to be interesting to see how they finish their season. They've got 5 games left, pending no further COVID issues. But for a little bit of a recap on what they did while we were gone and how things have been going in the past couple of days, we're going to send it down to John Bailey, who's got a segment on men's basketball.
Sometimes Mike Bray isn't sure if he's a college basketball coach or the chief surgeon of a hospital system. We've been on life support at least 4 times this season, Notre Dame's pithy leader recently said. Every time you're ready for our last rites, we come off the mat. Sunday's 10-point home win over Miami made it 6 out of 8 for the Fighting Irish. That came on the heels of a 93-89 win at Cameron Indoor Stadium, one in which Notre Dame climbed out of a 15-point hole just 6.5 minutes in. Just like that, Bray's 21st South Bend edition has climbed within 1 game of 500 and now sits 64th in the NCAA's net ranking. Plenty of work remains over the next few weeks to claim a spot in the 2021 tournament, but Notre Dame is suddenly a viable candidate for the big dance if you can look past their 1-7 record against Quadrant 1 opponents. Could this possibly be the same team that dropped 8 out of 11 games to start the year? Yes and no. An unusually stout early season schedule exposed weaknesses on the boards and in man-to-man defense, but the ever-resourceful Bray has found ways to compensate. This newly tweaked version of Irish hoops is back to playing small ball, running 4 guards at you and spacing the floor like nobody's business. On the defensive end, Notre Dame will play more zone than normal, often using 6'5 swingman Cormac Ryan on the back line, where he's a sneaky good rebounder. Like so many of Bray's best teams over the past 2 decades, this Notre Dame team doesn't beat itself. They avoid turnovers, make their free throws, and typically avoid foul trouble. That last trait went missing on Sunday when leading scorer and rebounder Nate Leshevsky went to the bench with his 3rd foul midway through the first half. Thanks to 6'8 reserve Nick Jogo, however, the Irish were able to withstand that challenge. A mind-boggling losing streak against ranked teams remain active. That point of embarrassment has reached 27 games and dates to November of 2017. The good news, in a down year for the ACC, the Fighting Irish don't face another ranked team until they play Florida State in the season finale on March 6th. Until then, Bray hopes that they can keep picking up wins and building their confidence. Forget building your resume or whatever that means. Right now, we're playing good basketball and I'm proud of these guys. After Sunday's gut check, he added this: even though it wasn't pretty, we figured out a way to win a hard game. We've come a long way with our mental toughness. If the team can maintain this sort of progression, I'd say there's a good chance we see the Fighting Irish go dancing in March.
Thank you for that, John. And he's got a good point. The Irish have been playing very well the last couple of games, so hopefully they can keep that up. Final stretch of the season ahead. They're 9-10, 6-7 in the ACC, and like we said, they've got 5 games left. But it was an unlucky day for the Irish. They caught a bad break in that Clemson, who they were supposed to play tomorrow, just had a slew of COVID-19 cases, so that game got canceled. Mike Bray said that they were going to try to get a replacement game in on Wednesday, so that way the guys wouldn't fall out of their rhythm with the schedule that they've had these last couple of weeks. But it's going to be difficult to try to get any ACC opponent in. So Bray said they might consider playing a Big East team if anyone's available. So all of that being said, what do you guys think? What does this canceled Clemson game mean for the Irish? Clemson would have been a really good win. They're 5th in the ACC. We're 10th in the ACC right now. So what does this canceled game mean for a team that's been so strong the past couple games?
Yeah, well, first I kind of did a double take when Bray said we might try to get someone else in the schedule that soon because, yeah. I mean, really, if you look at that fall slate before we left for break and when we were over break, all of those canceled games were really tough to get rescheduled, especially like that fast. So I'd be surprised if something does end up happening there. But in a weird year like this, you never know. But I'd say, I mean, that postponement hurts, but it can be recovered from very easily. Like you said, Notre Dame has won 6 of their last 8 games, and one of those 2 losses was that 2-point loss to Georgia Tech. So really, a lot of good games. Notre Dame has been able to finish down the stretch, which was kind of a struggle for the team in the first half of the season. So really, you see the pieces coming together, that junior class, that Hub, Leshevsky class, playing better together. Nick Jogo came off the bench, I'll talk about that later, and put together his best performance by far of the season. So some of those pieces kind of starting to come together. I don't think this postponement is anything to worry too much about.
Yeah, I'm with Caroline on this one. I don't think it's much to worry about, but it was nice as the schedule got lighter as it's moved on down the season. We have seen this team play better. They've scored 70 points or more in 7 of their last 8 games, 80 in 4 of those. So we've seen the offensive explosion that they're capable of. They've really been playing well offensively. The defense is another issue for this team, but when has defense ever been a strong suit for Notre Dame basketball? But I don't think that the issue with Clemson is a momentum issue. It's more so that we need wins in order to have any sort of tournament hope. So any cancellation is difficult.
Yeah, and I think you kind of touched on this a little bit, Caroline, with what you're saying about Nick Jogo. But the Irish have had a couple streaky players the last couple of games, and like we said, they've got about 5 games left on the schedule. Those are all conference games, and then like John was telling us, that ends with Florida State, who is 2nd in the ACC and they're a top 15 team right now. So thinking about what is left in the season and what lies ahead for these guys, what do you guys think the Irish need most importantly in order to make this late season push that could translate into an NCAA tournament berth?
I do think it's the bench. So Jogo and Wirtz specifically. Jogo, he put together a great game, 18 points, was 7 for 10 last night. That's up from his about 5 points average this year. So really quite the standout performance from him. We've talked about, him before. Last year, we talked about how he could come in and be a presence on defense, but there wasn't really much else that was expected from him, was kind of like the sense that we always got, and now there really is. And Bray has said this year that he has expected big things from him, in that year he came back now as a grad student, finally kind of showing that maturity that I think helps. That junior class is the other big thing, finally looking so mature and being able to kind of step into that role, having those transfers come in. I think it's just a team that now is finally kind of mixing well and mixing better than they have earlier this year. So if that can continue, and I think Jogo is a big part of that, if he can have that presence like he did off the bench against Miami, I think he has the biggest potential positive impact that we haven't seen and might not expect from this Notre Dame team down the stretch.
And it's funny that you say the bench, Caroline, because this Notre Dame team, it's 7 players deep. Our bench is only 2 players. Jogo is pretty much the bench. So I think that perhaps a positive of the Clemson game being canceled is that these 5 starters that we have who are playing about 30 minutes a game or more each, they get a little bit of rest as we move towards the home stretch of the season. I think this Notre Dame team has to run the table, though. That's really their only chance of getting in, get to 11-6, and hopefully you could squeeze your way in if an ACC tournament is to be played as well.
And I would say, though, I'm not really at this point expecting them to make it to the tournament. And I think if I set it up in my mind like that, I wouldn't expect anything other than to be disappointed by seeing them not make it. So I guess in my mind, it's a realistic expectation, not a pessimistic point of view, to say that this team is just not going to make the tournament. Now, if they do, then I'm wrong, and I will be gladly wrong about that. But it really, if there was any year for them to make it late, it would be this year with a down ACC like John referred to. But I still just don't really see the pieces coming together. You mentioned the lack of depth. That's going to hurt. The reason that you might make it to the tournament in this case is if you can string together a bunch of games when you don't have a bench. That's just not really going to be a possibility in the ACC tournament, I don't think. So, we'll see, and I could always be surprised. But this, to me, does not have the makings of a team that's going to surprise us with the tournament berth late.
Yeah, and I do think that one of the things that will be so important in clinching the tournament berth would be if they can have more consistency, specifically from guys like Cormac Ryan and Prentice Hub. These are guys that are just up and down every single game. Prentice Hub and Cormac Ryan combined for 30 or 40 some points against Duke, but I think they combined for more like 9 against Miami last night. So if Notre Dame does want to make the tournament, they're going to need every single player to step up, especially since their bench is so shallow, like you said, Paul. So, again, all those things being said, what one player, and Paul, why don't you answer this first, do you think that the Irish need most in the conclusion of this season?
Sure. I think it starts with Prentice Hub, because he's the player. When Prentice Hub is playing well, this Irish offense, they can be dynamic. So we saw last night against Miami, he didn't shoot too well. He had a rough night. But when Hub is on, you saw him against Duke hit the game-winning shot. Mike Bray used the word assassin to describe him. And that's a word Mike Bray hasn't used to describe a player since Jerry and Grant, Bonzie Colson. It's been a few years now since he's thrown that term out. So Prentice Hub, he's the kind of guy who, when he's hot, this offense can really get going. But when he's not, then we see the problems.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, and I would agree with you there that Hub does carry a lot of that on his back. Not to harp on my Jogo point, but I do just think he could have this big impact coming off the bench, because you see a lot of the sloppy mistakes late from guys like Hub, and part of that is, well, you have to imagine they're so tired at that point that's when those sloppy mistakes happen. So that's where those 2 guys coming off the bench could provide a little bit of relief and maybe help cut back on some of those mistakes later on. But I'd also say Cormac Ryan. We've seen his impact. It's been huge now in his first season that he's been able to play since sitting out last year, and if he can keep that up down the stretch, he has the makings to be consistent. We just haven't seen a ton of consistency from him yet.
Yeah, and I think both Prentice Hub and Cormac Ryan have similar roles in the sense that they're both really good at stretching the floor and moving the ball, but sometimes they get a little bit too tied up in being more of a shooting guard than a true point guard. So I think if the 2 of them can trying to sort out those offensive differences and really be strong for the Irish in continuing to spread the court, really pounding the assists, then those other guys who are on the inside can work on the rebounding game. So that wraps it up for men's basketball. So now we're going to turn to women's basketball, who's also had a little bit of an unfortunate situation with COVID. Their season got paused on Sunday, and that was due to positive tests in the Notre Dame women's basketball program itself. But for a little bit more on that, before we get started, we're going to send it down to Liz Perna, who's got everything you need to know.
Hi, my name is Liz Perna, and today we will be discussing Notre Dame women's basketball, starting with a quick look at the past, then a discussion of key players, and finishing with some predictions for the program. The Irish are no longer among the elite of women's college basketball, having gone 21-26 since the start of last season. This comes after a decade of vying with Connecticut for women's basketball dominance. However, it is not difficult to explain this nosedive. All the experienced talent left all at once, in this case in the form of the most prolific career-scoring starting five in the history of NCAA Division I basketball. It was a group that won the 2018 national title, then missed repeating in 2019 by a single basket. Nothing remotely resembling that mass departure had happened at Notre Dame during any previous year in at least the last decade. In the 2020 season, Notre Dame struggled to find their footing, possessing elite but inexperienced talent, along with some injuries, and finished the season 13-18. This season, however, the Irish are certainly on the upward trend. The Irish defeated Virginia Tech for the second time in 2 tries this season, just a couple of weeks ago, right before Tech turned around and beat then number 2 North Carolina State. The Irish will face the Wolfpack on the 15th. This season's 8-8 record, 6-6 in the Atlantic Coast Conference, is certainly a bit slow, especially compared to the success that Notre Dame has experienced for a quarter of a century, but it is ahead of last season's 13-18 and 8-10. Despite dealing with many injuries this season, Notre Dame is 5-4 in its last 9 games. Head coach Niele Ivey said this past week, "I definitely think we're on the cusp," as she discussed whether the Irish could reach the mountaintop again soon. She emphasized that she's more focused on her team's day-to-day growth than on envisioning an exact timeline for getting there, but added that she definitely thinks they have the pieces. Who are these key pieces that could help Notre Dame reach the summit once again? First and foremost is head coach and Muffet McGraw disciple Niele Ivey. She's the recruiting whiz, scouting whiz, and development whiz who is very much involved in every aspect of ND's success for a dozen straight years before skipping last season's 13-18 plummet to serve as an assistant with the NBA's Memphis Grizzlies. She just needs time, and she's gathering talent. She just added a point guard, an early enrollee, Olivia Miles, who's expected both inside and outside the program to become very special. Ivey also played a role in securing Sam Brunel, a top 5 recruit who's just a sophomore now, but has battled nagging injuries, and she helped secure freshman Maddie Westbeld, among others, correctly predicting that Westbeld would make a major impact right away. ESPN projected Notre Dame as the first team out in its NCAA tournament forecast, while last season's Irish had no chance of the field except to win the ACC tournament. Instead, they lost to last-place Pittsburgh in the opening round. What will the future of Notre Dame women's basketball look like? That's a question we'd all love the answer to. For now, though, let's just allow these young players to gain experience and hope for a better record than 2020. Back to you guys in the studio.
Thank you for that, Liz. And like she mentioned, there's definitely been a big loss of talent the past couple of years with this Notre Dame basketball team, but they are slowly starting to rebuild. And I think something that's helped a lot with that is, even though these aren't necessarily familiar faces, they're familiar names. We've got Niele Ivey in her first season, and then we've got Maddie Westbeld, the sister of Catherine Westbeld, who we know is on one of those Notre Dame national championship teams. We have Dana Mabry, who transferred in. Of course, her older sisters were a huge part of the Notre Dame program. Coming through. So it is a young team, and it's fairly inexperienced, but I do think there are some positive, some like shining players on this team, even if they are young. So what do you guys think? How's this team been looking compared to your expectations? And what does it mean to be so young in such a competitive division like the ACC?
Yeah, well, no one expected them to come out and be ACC contenders right away. At least I think most people reasonable expectations for this transition. But to me, this team has done everything that I could have hoped that they would. I think you see there's so much talent on the floor, and you see Maddie Westbeld step into her role like seamlessly, like kind of like how Sam Brunel stepped in last year, just like immediately finding that new pace of the college game. I think better than most women can when they get to college basketball. So I've been really impressed by her, and then Brunel continuing to take obviously a big role. And so there's just so much talent out there. Mabry, like you said, has been huge. And I think now you look, and there's 4 games left on the schedule, right? So it's important to finish on a strong note. Lost the last 3 games on a 3-game losing streak, but 2 of those losses were 5 and 6 points. So really, to me, there's just so many good pieces of this team, and Ivy has really just taken over this team with such an enthusiasm. And if you watch her when she's coming off the bench, like, these women seem to really respect her and seem to have this great relationship with her. So I think there are just so many great building blocks here that I'm really excited to see where this program goes. And to me, they've done everything that I could have hoped realistically they would do this season. And I'm excited to see like how that continues next year.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Caroline. The future's bright for this program. And the season's actually not over yet. There is still a chance of getting into the NCAA tournament this season. On ESPN, that right now they're the first team out of the first 4. So the cancellation of the NC State game, NC State, the 4th-ranked team in the country, maybe that's actually a good thing to not have to play them right now, and you could get a couple wins at the end of the season, and you could find this Notre Dame team actually in the tournament.
So do you guys think that this cancellation of the game, I mean, they haven't played in over 10 days. It's unlikely that they'll play. the rest of the week this week because they have to clear all the COVID protocols. Do you think that this extended break can be a chance for the Irish to kind of regroup and come back out stronger? Or do you think that this is a little bit too hard on a team that's so young and inexperienced? Do you think that they're just going to need a little bit more time, which is going to look like the off season or the beginning of the year next year, in order to kind of find their rhythm?
I think it's a good chance to regroup. I think now, like, coming off that 3-game losing skid, you see, like, a young team that now can kind of calm down, like, calm the nerves a little bit and say, like, okay, look, like, what can we do in these last 4 games of the regular season to try to make that late bid? I think I would disagree a little bit on the NC State point just because they played number 1 Louisville close. And so, like, they actually, like, had a chance in that game. They lost it towards the end. But, you know, they've shown that they can really compete with some of these better teams when they're on and when they're clicking. And so I think that could have been a nice chance to play another really solid team close. That being said, I don't think it's the end of the world with 4 games left. They have Syracuse, Pitt, Florida State, Louisville. Importantly, 3 home, 1 away, and they're 6-2 at home, 2-6 away. So really, like, this has been a strong home team. If they can win those 3 home ones and then try to pull off that other one on the road, like, I mean, it's not out of the question that they might actually be able to finish the season on a 4-0 streak to end the regular season. So I think when you look forward at those, there is some potential there. I'm hesitant to get too far into that just because they are so young, and it's tough to expect a young team to be able to have that composure so late. But also, if there's any coach who in her first year can coach them through that, it would be Niele Ivey. So I'll be very interested to see how those 4 go.
And the game to circle at the end of the season is that Louisville rematch here at Notre Dame. Number 3 team in the country. If you're able to get a win there, you probably get into the tournament.
Right, and playing them at home, like
Yep.
you said, is huge.
Mm-hmm. So Paul, would you say that a successful end of the season means getting into the tournament, or is there a way that the season can be a success even if the Irish aren't able to kind of clinch that bid?
I think you just have to look at it from a broad picture here and say this season's already a success for Notre Dame, but you have to remember what program this is. This is Notre Dame women's basketball here. And getting into the tournament, that separates a successful season from perhaps maybe the expectation coming in was to get to the tournament this year. Within the locker room.
Right. I'd be interested to know what those locker room conversations are like, and I'd be interested to know how Coach Ivey is, like, framing those conversations with her team, because there are 2 different ways to look at that. There's, like, we're just going to do everything we can, and this is, like, the first year all together, and it's just, like, such a solid start for them. But you have to imagine that being the competitor she is and knowing she has the competitors on her team that she does, that there are kind of those expectations and hopes that maybe they can pull off that Louisville rematch, which I don't think is out of the question, especially at home. So, you know, I would be very curious to know what Niele Ivey is saying to her team right now, but I think it's a success either way, but I don't think it's out of the question that they might pull off a little bit more of a success than we might expect.
There's no chance that there's no chance that anyone in that locker room is going to be satisfied not making the tournament this season. With the way it's progressed and with the schedule they have in front of them and the opportunity, not a chance that they're happy with anything other than a bid.
Yeah, and as we said before, this Notre Dame team is young, so even if they aren't able to make the tournament this year, hopes are very, very bright for the future with all these young people that are going to be returning. I mean, they're only going to lose Destiny Walker, who's a graduate student. The other 2 seniors are going to be Nicole Benz and Michelle Mond, but Michelle Mond should be returning, or Michaela Mond, excuse me. Michaela Mond should be returning because she took a redshirt her freshman or sophomore year with an ACL injury. So that's going to wrap up what we have on women's basketball for today. So to transition to hockey, we're going to send it down to Kieran Cantwell, who's going to give us a recap and a little bit of a preview of what's been going on the ice.
Hello, I'm Kieran Cantwell, and let's take a look at how this Notre Dame men's hockey team has fared in this unpredictable season. Expected to hover around the high teens to low 20s according to the preseason rankings, the Irish have played relative to expectations. They currently sit at the first team to receive votes, just outside the top 25. Playing Big Ten hockey is no easy task, with matchups against top 10 teams like Minnesota, Michigan, and Wisconsin all season long. Notre Dame owns an overall record of 10, 11, and 1, with a Big Ten record of 8, 9, and 1. With a 6-6 record since the second half of the season began in early January, the Irish have been trying to find their footing. In mid-January, they headed out to Minneapolis to face the number 1 team at the time, the Minnesota Gophers. The Golden Domers escaped the road trip with 2 very impressive wins, both by only 1 goal. However, the Irish failed to build off the momentum, losing their next 3 games, then following that brutal stretch with 3 wins of their own. After a streaky month, it was Notre Dame's turn to host Minnesota for a 2-game series, but they proceeded to get shut out 0-3 both matches. With only 6 more games left, 2 each against Wisconsin, Michigan State, and Penn State, the Irish are looking to hit an extra gear as the Big Ten tournament is just around the corner. Thanks for tuning in. Now back to you guys in the studio.
Thank you, Kieran. And like he said, we're just under 500 at a little bit over the halfway point of the season with hockey here. So Jeff Jackson's definitely going to try to get his guys to do a final push. They have 3 series left before the Big Ten tournament, and hopefully the Frozen Four if they can make it back there. But the Irish are just now coming off a loss. They got swept by Minnesota, who they were able to sweep themselves in Minneapolis earlier in the season. So in your opinion, Paul, why don't you start? What was the biggest difference between the series we just saw the Irish lose and the series we saw them win at the beginning of the season?
Well, one stat that jumps off the page is the power play efficiency. Notre Dame scored in that first series against Minnesota and actually held Minnesota 0 for 7 on the power play. Not the same story this time around. Notre Dame unable to convert. Minnesota was able to convert on power play. And that seemed to me to be the biggest difference.
Yeah, I think the same note jumped out at all 3 of us. Notre Dame, not an issue of Notre Dame not getting those power plays in that second series, but had 7 opportunities in the first series and then 10 power plays in the second. Scored in each of those games of the first series on a power play and then in neither in the second. So it wasn't an issue of not having the opportunities but capitalizing on them. Obviously Minnesota ranked #1 in the country at the time of the loss in the first 2, you have to know, was coming into that with revenge on their minds. And that Minnesota team is a very solid one, still leading the Big Ten. So, it was a combination of Minnesota being able to kind of put together better power play defense in that regard, and I'm sure that was a focus coming into that second series, which clearly showed, and then Notre Dame just not being able to capitalize as well as they were in those first 2 games in that first series.
Yeah, certainly capitalizing on the man-up opportunities has been important for the Irish, although they do trail their opponents in those statistics across the season. But in order to win against opponents like Minnesota, you have to capitalize when you've got an extra guy on the ice. And something else that Jeff Jackson mentioned that was interesting was that Notre Dame came into this series a little bit different than they came into the last one. So the last time these guys met, which was in the middle of January, Notre Dame and Minnesota had both come off of split series, and this past weekend when they played again, Minnesota was coming off a 2-game sweep. They got swept, and Notre Dame had just beaten the same team twice. So Jackson said that mentality going into the game, the Irish maybe were a little high on their horses, and Minnesota was ready for revenge. So I think that certainly played a factor as well. So like we said before, there's 3 series left in this season for the Irish. They've got Wisconsin, they've got Michigan State, both of those are away, and then they've got Penn State at home to close out the year. So what do you guys think is going to be the key to finishing the season strong for the Irish and hopefully getting to that Big Ten title game?
Yeah, well, neither of those series did Notre Dame sweep with a win. Like the first time they played them, they tied Michigan State and lost to them in overtime and won. And then both the Penn State games were overtime games. So you see so many close games in those 2 series, and you expect that probably they will be close in these rematches. I think if Notre Dame can sweep any one of these 3 series, that would be a positive note heading into that Big Ten tournament. If they could sweep 2, even better. But I do expect a lot of close matchups in these 3, just because the first series were close that first time, and then Wisconsin, which they lost both to the first time they played in November. So it's a little bit hard to tell kind of where those 2 teams stand, but Wisconsin, second in the Big Ten, has put together a pretty solid season since seeing Notre Dame in November. So I expect that they'll probably come out the best of those 3 teams. But I think that Notre Dame now has a chance going in, and then hosting the Big Ten tournament is obviously kind of a huge break in their direction, maybe to put together a strong end of the season here.
And I think this weekend actually will tell the story for the rest of the year. Going up to Madison, 2 games against Wisconsin, who, as you said, very good team, #5 in the country right now. You need to at least split that series if you're Notre Dame. That set of games is so important for the rest of the season. And then hopefully perhaps you get a sweep and you could come in with a lot of momentum against Michigan State and Penn State. But it all starts this weekend. You can't beat Wisconsin once. It's going to be tough for them to get into the tournament.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because naturally in our minds we think that hosting is going to be an advantage to the Irish, but they have been abysmal at home this year. They're 3-10-1 when playing in Compton, so it'll be interesting to see if that narrative changes at all with the Big Ten tournament. Obviously it's the postseason. Like you said, Paul, maybe if they can get a sweep in Madison, like you said, Caroline, playing strong against Penn State, Michigan State, maybe that could get them some momentum going into the end of the year. So that's pretty much all the time we have today. Thanks for tuning in to Shamrock Sports, as always. A little bit of a different time this semester. We're going to be on Monday and Tuesday nights instead of our usual Friday afternoons. But we'll be here every week arguing, as always. So if you haven't had enough, feel free to follow us on Instagram at Notre Dame Television. Again, I'm Ellen Geyer. Today I'm joined by Pineda and Paul Farrington. And this has been Shamrock Sports. Thank you so much for watching.